Alright, because of the collab in Genshin, I thought I'd give Horizon a go, and I'm gonna be honest, I did not go into this open-minded. I expected a generic open world game which could as well have been named Assassin's Creed Horizon or Far Cry Zero Dawn. And what did I get? Exactly fucking that. I really dislike this game. Not because it's this terrible piece of shit that has microtransactions on top of everything. I don't think anybody is gonna have a particularly bad time with this. It's just too generic for that, and that's exactly why I hate it. For example, Nier Replicant. There is so much you can criticize. Terrible amount of grinding, the insane amount of content you have to redo over and over again, and so much more. But it dares to try stuff. Yeah, you have to repeat a lot of content to get all the endings, but that gives the game some very unique ways to tell the story. Objectively, Nier has way more flaws, but with that come unique positives, which I prefer over the generic open world experience number 241. Those were my overall feelings, so let's go in depth. I said this game doesn't show anything unique, and I was lying honestly. This game has the unique goal of actually trying to put you to sleep with the story. Holy shit. The only reason I didn't skip everything was to get the footage you're seeing right now. I don't even have motivation to talk about it. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic world filled with machines, and you're playing Aloy, who gets raised by a foster father until you're old enough to get accepted by the local tribe. And so on, you know that shit anyways. You're of course a chosen one in a post-apocalyptic setting and have to save the world. That was set up many years ago by the people responsible for the current state of the planet. The sequel bait at the end is a must-have as well, of course. What doesn't help the terrible story is how boring the conversations are. NPCs just stand there and spout so much exposition. Of course, we need to have meaningless dialogue choices as well. That leads to Aloy's characterization being weird. She has almost no personality, so that none of the choices seem too much out of character. If you would have switched her with Lara Croft or Jill Valentine, we would have gotten the exact same game. And besides her, none of the characters are worth talking about. Because it's an open world, you have like 100 characters, and making them interesting would be too much work, of course. So you just end up with this horde of empty, soulless, exposition dumping pixels. Do yourself a favor and skip every cutscene and NPC dialogue. Or just don't touch this game at all. Play fucking DMC or Yakuza or something. Actual good games. As I said before, this game isn't completely terrible, and that is because of the open world, but that doesn't mean too much. All open world games have the unique trait of working as junk food that has this decent level of fun attached to it, so the game never gets unbearable. If we were to rate all the open world games, you'd have Breath of the Wild on the throne. I don't like Zelda or Nintendo, but nobody can deny this. You have so much freedom, the only limit is your own creativity, honestly. Somewhat close to that is Genshin Impact. It has the best puzzles and feels especially rewarding because of the gacha mechanics. Way behind that is Witcher 3, and behind that everything else. Horizon fits perfectly in there. It has no interesting puzzles, is full with meaningless collectibles that only exist to feed your brain some dopamine, and on top of that, a lot of camps to take over. The different collectibles focus on the various gameplay aspects, so let's use them to talk about the gameplay. But before that, I want to go over the basic combat. The game focuses on ranged combat while giving you some close range options, and you can also play some traps. You have different bows that use unique arrow types, from normal arrows for damage, fire arrows for lingering damage, or tear blast arrows that remove armor from enemies. You can place electro and fire traps for enemies to run into, which is great when the enemy isn't aggroed yet. Rope casters are used to pin down enemies, which is pretty fun. All of that stuff needs ammo that you have to craft, which forces you to collect all the dog shit lying around. Crafting has almost zero value and is only there to fill up playtime. There's some more stuff, but I'm gonna stop here because all of that shit does not matter. There are also slings, and they give you the option to shoot bombs. One of those are freeze bombs. They completely trivialize the game. Not because it stuns enemies like the name suggests, but because it reduces their defense like crazy. Every single enemy in this game gets destroyed by freezing them and just shooting your strongest standard arrows. The only exception is the final boss, and the strongest normal enemy from the expansion. The difficulty also doesn't matter in the slightest. My first playthrough was on hard and the second one on ultra hard, and what I just said applies to both cases. For a while I had this ridiculous opinion that it doesn't matter when something is overpowered in a single player game. That of course is completely retarded. As a game designer, it is your job to incentivize the player to use all the options available to them. That is also one of the biggest problems with the DMC games. You can get through all of them by spamming the normal combo. Horizon has the same problem, and that also cripples one of the best things about this game. The enemy design is actually pretty damn good. You have a lot of variety, my favorite one being the rock crushers. The first time I encountered them was the most fun I've had in this game, and I won't forget it anytime soon, unlike the rest of this game. They dig themselves underground and attack you while being mostly untouchable, and I really struggled at that point. Now I know that you have to shoot off the armor on their feet to force them to stay on the ground, or just freeze them and do 3 times more damage. Yeah, overall the enemy design is great, but the game makes it hard to appreciate. One of the few exceptions to that are the frost claws from the DLC. They are awesome. They can't be frozen, so it's pretty damn challenging. If you look at that design, they remind you of a brown bear, which is also reflected in the gameplay. They move so much and it just feels like pure chaos. Love fighting them. Now that the combat is checked off the list, let's talk about the different challenges in the open world. Bandit camps force you to engage with a lot of humans. You can use the incredibly shallow sneaking mechanics, but I just run in there Rambo style. Humans have the exact same freeze weakness, but that's too much effort. Your pathetic spear actually is viable here. The corrupted zones are filled with tougher enemies, which sucks because they're still weak to freeze. Vantage points and Banuk figures, quote unquote, test your climbing. That translates into holding forward with your left stick. Sometimes when shit gets crazy, you have to press X as well. Incredibly shallow like the entire game. Ancient vessels and flowers are just lying around randomly. Guess they ran out of ideas? The highlights are the hunting grounds. Those are 15 different challenges that grade you based on time. These are pretty cool because they force you to interact with combat in ways that doesn't include freeze bombs. Of course, every game these days needs RPG mechanics so you can upgrade your equipment and your character. The equipment is the typical stat increasing bullshit that's only there to give you some dopamine. The skills are actually somewhat interesting. They unlock stuff like killing enemies from your mount or slowing down time while aiming mid-air. It's fine, but all of that is unnecessary because of the freeze bombs. In the last quarter of the story, the exposition dumps take place in ancient laboratories which all look the same and are filled with these terrible puzzles. I hated this section so much. You spend so much time standing around listening to this terrible exposition dialogue. Yeah, I don't want to play a video game anyways. That's all I have to say to the main game, so let's get to the expansion. The DLC Frozen Wilds is just exactly more of the same. That can be really good. For example, the Souls games and Witcher DLCs do the same, but there's a little difference. Those games are actually pretty fucking good. You have more enemies with the same weakness with the exception of the previously mentioned Frostclaws, more terrible story that only deserves to be skipped, and another open world section that is filled with terrible side quests and meaningless collectibles. You also get some new weapons which are actually cool. They require a shit ton of resources to craft the ammo they need, which rewards you with some amazing damage. Actually worth using alongside the freeze bombs. The hunting ground is a bit worse here though. Instead of creative challenges, you just have to kill endgame machines as quickly as possible. But that does have its own appeal. What bothered me the entire time while playing was the setting. Why the fuck is it another ice area? Half of the map was already frozen. Was there really nothing else you could have come up with? DLCs are the perfect time to go wild. Do something crazy like going full sci-fi. If you like the main game somehow, then this DLC is a no-brainer. But I felt like my time was getting robbed. I expected to not like this game, and that's exactly how it turned out. I think many people also got a kick out of the setting and the graphics, but I prefer my stuff to look a bit more IIR, so it's just not for me. Like I said at the beginning, this game isn't offensive in any way. It's a polished single-player experience with no microtransactions. No one is going to suffer while playing this, but I'd rather suffer through some tedious sections if it means I get to experience something truly unique.